Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about the concept of division, but in particular today, we're going to talk about division when you're dividing by a double-digit number. A lot of times that's something that feels scary to people, but really it's not a whole lot different than when you're dividing by a single-digit number. So let's take a look, and I'm going to share with you some strategies that might make this slightly easier. Alright, so I've written this problem for us in the normal way that you're going to see division, and the way that we're going to read this is 9,196 divided by 22. Now, one strategy that a lot of people use is they take this number here, which is your divisor. That's the number that you're dividing by. And one thing that people will do is they'll write multiples of that number. So just to give you an example of what that looks like, you would write, for example, 22, and then 22 times 1 is 22. So then you would say, what's the next multiple of 22? Well, you would double that, 44, and so on. Now, one problem with the number 22 is that you probably don't know your multiples of 22 right off the bat. So you'd probably have to get into saying 22 plus 22 is 44, plus 22 more is 66, plus 22 more is 88, and so on. Now, sometimes that can be difficult to do. That may be something that still works for you. If that's something that you want to use, that's fine. One strategy that I like to get into when I'm dividing by double digits, though, is guessing and checking, and I'm going to show you how I do that as well. Now, one thing I always like to start before I divide is I like to put in markers for place value. So I have my thousands, my hundreds, my tens, and my ones. I like to do that just to remind myself which place value that I'm working with. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with this 9, and remember that 9 is in the thousands place, so it has a value of 9,000. Now, what I'm actually asking myself is, if I have 9,000, can I split that up into 22 groups? Well, I can, but I can't split it up by giving 1,000 to each group because I only have 9,000s and I'm splitting those up into 22 groups. So I'm going to say I have a 0 in the thousands place. Okay, so then I'm going to move on to the hundreds place. Now, you'll notice here, I have 91 hundreds, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to split that up. So if I have 91 hundreds, I'm trying to figure out how many hundreds can fit into each group without going over 91 hundreds. So we're looking at this number 22. Now, like I said before, it's always a strategy to go through and write your multiples over here, and that can be a good strategy. One thing that I like to do, though, is I like to take that number 22 and I like to ask myself, what is a number close to 22 that is really easy to count by? For me, that number is 20. Now, the number 20 is really easy to count by, and most of you, I think, will be able to do this. So I'm just going to write some multiples of 20. So 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 140, 160, and so on. Now, you may wonder, why did I write down multiples of 20? Well, this number is really close to the number 22, so I know that those multiples of 20 are going to be really close to the multiples of 22. Now, I'm going to look over here, and I'm going to find the closest multiple of 20 that is closest to 91. So I see 20, 40, 60, 80. Now, 80 is 1, 2, 3, 4 multiples of 20. So I don't know what 4 multiples of 22 is, but I'm pretty sure, because 80 is close, that it's going to be right around 80. So I'm going to go over to the side, and this is a little bit of guessing and checking that comes in. I'm going to go over to the side, and I'm going to say 22 times 4, because remember we said 4 multiples, 22 times 4, and that is the same as 88. Now, it just so happens that I guessed right this time. 88 is the closest that I can get to 91 hundreds. So I'm going to write 1, 2, 3, 4 multiples of 22, which would mean that I can fit 4 hundreds into each of those groups, because remember I had 91 hundreds total. Now, after we've split some of those up, we've split up 88 of those hundreds. What we have to do is we have to see how many that we would have left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 4 times 22 was 88, and I'm going to subtract 91 minus 88 to figure out how many of those hundreds that we still have left to split up, which would be 3 hundreds left over. So we split up 88 out of those 91 hundreds. All right. Next thing I'm going to do is I am going to bring down my next value. My next value is in the tens place, and that's going to be a 9. Now notice up here in our place value, we are working in the tens place now. We have 39 tens to split up, and we are splitting those up into 22 groups. Now, just like last time, something I like to do is I like to go over to this list of 20s just like I did before, and I'm going to count until I get close to 39. So we have 20, 40. Notice 40 is just slightly bigger than 39. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try 2 multiples of 22. So I'm going to go down to the side. We'll go over here this time. And I'm going to do 22 times 2, which happens to be 44. Now notice 44 is slightly bigger than 39. We don't have 44 tens to split up. We only have 39 tens to split up. So that tells me that we don't have 2 tens that we can fit into each group. So that tells me I just need to go back down. My guessing and checking didn't work that time. So instead of 2 groups, I know that it's going to be 1 group. Now, I put 10 into each group, or 1 multiple of 22. So I'm going to do 1 times 22 to figure out how many that I have left. And I figure out that I still have 17 tens left. And in addition to that, I also have 6 ones. So even after splitting up all of that, I still have 176 ones left to split up into 22 groups. Now, one last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go through again, and I'm going to use that as a resource. So I'm going to count. I'm going to say, we're going to do before 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 140, 160. Notice 160 is pretty close. We're going to go up another one because it seems to be even more. 180. All right, so 180 is just slightly too big. So let's go back down to 160. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try 8 multiples of 22, and we're going to see how close that gets to 176. It might be close, it might be exactly. We're going to see what it does. Sometimes it takes a couple times when you're doing this. So I'm going to go back over to the side where I was before, and I'm going to do 22 times 8, which happens to be exactly 176, which is exactly what we needed. Now notice that strategy with 20s really worked that time. If that number had been too low, then I would go to the next multiple, which would be 9 multiples. If that number had been too high, then I would go down 1 multiple to 7 multiples. Now that means that I can fit 8 ones into each group, 8 ones into each of those 22 groups, which would subtract away the rest of that, which would leave me with nothing remaining and would tell me that my final answer is 418. Now remember, we could always then check this by doing 418 times 22 to get 9,196, which is what we started with. I really recommend that you use this strategy of thinking, what is a number close to 22? In this case was 20. Picking a number that's easy to count by, and that is really going to make that double-digit division much, much, much easier. So I really suggest that you try that out and see if that works for you, and hopefully it will.